Hello friends, today we are going to deal with a few concepts related to groups. Before we actually introduce the concepts, I am going to picturize a situation for you. It is a Sunday afternoon, you have had your lunch, a nice meal, and you are relaxing, you want to watch TV. So, you go sit down and switch on the TV. Now, when you do that, how do you see yourself? Sitting all prim and proper or adopting a more relaxed pose? Usually what happens when someone is sitting within their house watching TV, the pose they usually take is maybe probably one leg draped over the armrest or in a half supine pose, that is almost as if you are half asleep, or in some other pose which you feel is very convenient. So, the sofa doubles up as a bed, right. This is the kind of posture you take when you are all alone and sitting and watching the TV. Now, add some more to this. The bell rings and your mother's friend walks in. She is her colleague and she has come to discuss something. What do? As soon as the lady walks into the room, what is your first reaction? You quickly change your pose. You sit in a posture which is more socially acceptable. You sit in a way which is designed or which is designated as a proper posture. Sofa is used as a sofa, as a sitting instrument and not for lying down. And you would probably turn down the volume of the TV which was blaring earlier would be turned down. What has happened here? As soon as a second person has entered the environment, there has been a change in your behavior. This is the concept we will be beginning with today in this session. This session is what is called social facilitation. What happens in social facilitation? Social facilitation refers to the effect of the presence of others. Whenever we do something, we act in a certain manner when we are alone and act slightly differently when there are others around us. So, the mere presence of another person is enough for us to change our behavior patterns. And if the person belongs to our own group, the shift in behavior is much more. Let us assume it is an office scenario. All the people have come in, they are sitting in their seats, it is just after 9 o'clock, the office hours have just started. But along with that, there is a general sharing of hello, hi and good mornings that you hear around, people probably loitering around. But the minute there is some indication that the head of the department or the boss or a superior or somebody else is walking in, people quickly settle down. Again, within the group, someone of a higher status has walked in, and so immediately people's behavior has changed. This is exactly what social facilitation talks about. When we are talking about social facilitation, why does this happen and how does this happen? Sociologists and psychologists wanted to understand this shift in people's behavior in the presence of other individuals. Several theories have been proposed to explain why people behave differently when they are with other people. The first theory that we will be looking at today is what is called the drive theory. The drive theory of social facilitation suggests that the presence of others is arousing. Our emotions are aroused, feelings are aroused, and accordingly this has an effect on individuals' performance. Now, when we say it has an effect on performance, how does this affect performance? It could affect performance in two ways. It could either inhibit performance, or it could improve the performance of a person in a particular situation. How would we decide whether the presence of another person is inhibiting performance or improving performance? Now, this would depend on the response that is being made. If the dominant responses are correct, then the presence of others actually improves performance. And if the dominant responses are incorrect in that particular situation, then what happens? It inhibits performance. Let me give you an example. Let us say there is a practice for the school play going on. Suppose you have a very short part and you have learnt your lines and you have been practicing for the last 10 days, and at that point you have an audience. Then what happens? When you have an audience, you want to say the lines with some more emotion, some more emphasis, so that the people sitting there can comment and get back to you and tell you, you are doing a wonderful job. Okay. So, the same situation, depending on whether the dominant response is correct or incorrect, could inhibit or improve performance. This is what the drive theory of social facilitation is all about. Now, there is another view of how social facilitation occurs. This is what is called the evaluation apprehension view. What is evaluation? Evaluation means judging. Evaluation means somebody is standing in judgment. Apprehension. Apprehension is some kind of inhibition, some kind of fear, some kind of a feeling that you are not comfortable. So, evaluation apprehension view says that in the presence of others, people experience feelings of discomfort. Why? They feel that the persons who are standing in front of them are going to evaluate them, are going to judge them, and because of that they experience anxiety. When anxiety is experienced, it affects the performance, it affects a shift in behavior patterns, and this shift in performance, this shift in behavior patterns is what we see when a person is in the midst of a group. So, this is the focus of the evaluation apprehension viewpoint. In fact, very interesting experiments were conducted to test this particular view. What they did was they had multiple scenarios. In one scenario, there was an audience who was sitting and looking at or very seriously trying to focus on what a person was doing. That was one situation. Another situation was the audience was totally engrossed in discussing among themselves, talking among themselves. So, basically the impression that was created in that particular situation was that there are people in the same room, but they are not interested in what you are doing. This was a second situation. A third situation was where the audience was actually blindfolded. What do you think happened? In the first case, when the audience was paying attention to what the actors or the participants were doing, there was a distinct shift in behavior, a distinct shift in performance. But when the audience was blindfolded and when the audience was not paying attention, there was not much of a change in the behavior of the participant. So, this particular experiment actually reinforced the evaluation apprehension view of social facilitation. So, what does this teach us? We tend to behave differently when there are others around us and when we feel that they are noticing us. If we get the idea that they are not noticing us, or if we are comfortable with the idea that they cannot see what we are doing, in such cases our performance and our behavior does not really change much. third viewpoint which tries to explain how social facilitation happens. This is what is called the distraction conflict theory. This theory says that social facilitation stems from conflict that is produced when individuals pay attention to the others who are present there and also to the task that they are doing. So, when you are doing something and a second person walks in, what happens? Your attention gets diverted. Earlier, you were focusing only on the task that was being performed. It could be you are writing something, you are listening to the music, you are watching TV, you are paying attention to what the teacher is saying. It could be anything, the task being performed at that particular point in time. Now, when another person walks in or when a group of people walk in or in a classroom situation, the teacher has started her lecture, you are paying attention and somebody walks in late. What happens? Immediately, your attention is divided between what the teacher is saying and also who has come in, how are they dressed, where are they walking up to, where are they going to sit. Unconsciously, we start noticing all these things as well. Now, this person could probably walk up to the chair next to you and would want to sit there. So, that means your attention is diverted to removing your bag from the chair, moving a little so that you can accommodate her. And in the bargain, you are also listening to what the teacher is saying, but what is happening is there is a split, a conflict in the attention you are paying to two different things. Now, this creates a distraction. So, this distraction conflict theory says that we behave differently when others are around us because our attention is divided between what they are doing and the task on hand. Now, others, a mere presence is enough to create what is called a cognitive overload. Cognitive overload means the additional requirement that you are placing on your cognitive processes over and above what you had been doing earlier. You are now concentrating both on what your teacher is saying as well as on what is happening. Why is that person standing? Does he have a notice in hand? Is he or she a classmate? Is he an attendant who has come to declare a holiday? All kind of things. So, this distraction actually causes you to change your behavior in that given situation. And then what happens? We only focus on essential cues and ignore the non-essential cues. When there is a distraction, when there is a third person who walks in as part of the social facilitation process, we focus on the essential cues and ignore the non-essential cues. So, the teacher's voice is important, the information being imparted is important, you focus on that, but you are no longer looking at the faculty member. Similarly, the person who is standing there, his or her identity is important, so you quickly look at the person without really taking in other details like their dress, appearance and other such things. Similarly, if it is say an attendant, you quickly look at his hands to see if there is a notice or he has come for something else, and you ignore to look at his face, to look at his dress, to look at his footwear. All these things do not really matter. So, what are you doing at that point in time? When there is a presence of a third person in the class consisting of a group of students and teachers, the third person being the person who has walked in. As per the social facilitation processes, you are focusing on the essential cues and ignoring the non-essential cues. But what happens in the bargain, you tend to lose certain information and there is a change in your behavior. In fact, there are several studies which show how social facilitation occurs not only in people, but also in animals right down to insects like cockroaches. Even in cockroaches, the presence of few more cockroaches looking on seem to be having an effect on how the cockroach behaves in an experimental setup, which was actually tested and studied in a laboratory. There was another very interesting experiment which was conducted on people, specifically on eating patterns. Now, the eating patterns and eating behavior was studied in 3 different kinds of scenarios. One scenario was a person sitting in front of a TV and eating something. Okay. The second scenario was a person sitting in the presence of a group of friends and eating. The third scenario was the person sitting in a formal restaurant where nobody is known to him or her and he is eating something. People found that when the presence of others is not making an impact on you, there is no major shift in your eating behavior. But when you are watching TV and eating, or when you are talking to your friends, interacting with your friends and eating, the participants were actually eating a lot more. Okay? So, that particular behavior was being enhanced. So, this particular explanation of the experiment actually once again reinforced the fact that there is a cognitive overload which occurs, and because of that, because of the kind of people who come in, the social facilitation process could either inhibit or improve performance. In either cases, there is a definite shift in how a person behaves when he is all alone vis-a-vis how a person behaves in the presence of others. Now, we will move on to another very interesting concept that people display in the presence of others. All of you must have seen group of people working together. It could be a group of students working on a project, it could be a group of construction workers working in a particular site. Now, if you stand and watch them for some time, what do we notice generally? Generally, we see that a few people seem to be working at a faster pace, or seem to be working more dedicatedly, or seem to be working more than a few others. There is always one or two either standing idly or doing things very slowly or sitting around, lazing around. This is a very, very common observation that all of us see whenever there is an entire group of people working on a single job. You can also take the example of social gatherings like marriages, functions, where an entire group of people sit down to do one job. This is exactly what is called social loafing. Social loafing is very, very evident, especially when we see additive tasks being performed. What do we mean by additive tasks? Additive tasks are all those tasks where several people contribute and the sum total is what is required as output. So, in such cases where there are additive tasks, there is always a demonstration of social loafing happening. So, what is social loafing? Social loafing is a reduction in motivation and a reduction in performance when individuals work in groups as compared to when they work alone. Now, this social loafing, which we have seen through so many examples, was also tested experimentally within the lab settings. Psychologists really wanted to see if this happens unconsciously in all situations or is it specific to only a few kinds of situations. One of the experiments that was conducted was a very simple experiment. a group of people were put in a room and they were told that there were similar groups standing elsewhere. There were a lot of people, and what was the task given? The task given to them was to clap very loudly. Now, initially it was a small group of 2 people, 3 people. Then with each iteration of the experiment, more people were being added, and the noise that is generated out of clapping was being recorded. Now, what do you think happened? Initially, when the group was small, people were really clapping hard, but as the group size increased, people no doubt were clapping. The noise had gone up, but the amount that it had gone up was not really proportional to the increase in the group. So, as people were being added, the participants stopped clapping or started clapping in a very, very low manner. A classic case of social loafing. When there are 10 people around me clapping, I feel that even if I clap slowly, it is not going to make much of a difference. And if all the 10 people think similarly, or even 8 out of 10 think like that, what happens? The group output goes down, and this is exactly how social loafing gets manifested in a group situation. So, social loafing gets manifested more if the group size is large. Now, what happens when there is a very large group? What we call a crowd. In a crowd, what psychologists have found is there is a distinct shift in behavior, what we call the mob behavior, the mob patterns. There is a concept called deindividuation. Deindividuation occurs in behaviors within a crowd. This is a psychological state which is characterized by reduced self-awareness, which is brought about by the anonymity that a large group situation offers. And typically, when we see mob behavior, when we see crowds suddenly going out of control, or in situations like football matches where people seem to be behaving in a very, very unruly manner, these are the same people who probably won't do things like that if they were out all alone, or probably in the context of their home or in the context of their workplace. So, how is it that the same person is behaving in a much more graceful manner when he is at home, and is behaving in a much more rough and possibly damaging way in a large crowd? This is because of the deindividuation that occurs. The person does not think of himself as an individual. His actions no longer seem to be personal. His actions are seen as part of the crowd. The person himself feels that whatever he does is part of the mob, part of the group behavior. So, deindividuation occurs when there are large crowds, and that is why people who never, when news channels show us behaviors like pelting stones, people, young people behaving in aggressive ways, we wonder, they are people like you and me. How come they are behaving like this? This is exactly what occurs when they are in a group. The social facilitation is manifested in the form of deindividuation, and there is a vast shift in the behavior patterns that the individual exhibits. So, how do we address social loafing? Obviously, social loafing is creating some kind of a disharmony. Social loafing is having a negative effect. The group output goes down, or the individual exhibits undesirable behavior patterns. So, how do we address social loafing? One way of doing it is to make each person's actions identifiable. The other way, if there is a great group cohesion and greater commitment to successful task performance, in such cases also social loafing goes down. The third possible way is to make the members feel that their contribution is not redundant. They should not feel that this is a work that 6 of us are doing, anyway 4 of them are going to do, whether I do or not, it is not really going to make much of a difference. If this kind of a feeling creeps in, there is a greater chance of social loafing occurring. Instead, if the person is made to feel that his contribution is valued, his contribution is not redundant, in such situations social loafing can be prevented. The other possible way of reducing social loafing is setting minimum standards. You have to do at least 10 parts of this particular action. You have to deliver at least this bit of work. People are made responsible for a particular set of tasks. In such cases, social loafing can be avoided. Now, we will look at a third concept which is very, very interesting. This is learning that happens in group context. This is what is called modeling, social modeling, which is also known as observational learning or social learning. So, social modeling is a basic form of learning where people acquire learning or acquire new forms of behavior by observing the others around them. So, this kind of a learning can necessarily occur only in a group context, only when there are others present. When we identify ourselves with the group, we expect that whatever the other person does or whatever the other group members do is the right way of doing things. When we are part of a group, the degree of modeling that happens is far higher. When we identify with a particular group, we tend to be influenced more by the messages that are directed towards us or toward that particular group. So, this is actually what we call a reference group. A reference group is the group we look up to. Reference group is the group of people we identify with and people whose opinions matter to us. So, anyone who belongs to the reference group becomes a role model for us, and modeling of behavior happens as in we observe the behaviors of people who are part of the reference group and we learn to behave in similar ways. This is what modeling or social learning is all about. This is that unique form of learning which occurs in the presence of others in a group context.
Ma'am, does vicarious learning comes under social learning?
In the case of vicarious learning, what happens? Learning is through the learning of others. But in modeling, these are specific behavior patterns. And by modeling, we are observing another person and learning to do things in that manner. So, there is a subtle difference between vicarious learning and modeling. And this theory of observational learning or modeling was given to us by Albert Bandura.